Shortly after the Sydney Town Hall clock tower was completed in 1873, landscape photographer Francis Robinson climbed to the top with his bulky equipment and took a 360-degree panorama of the city. This wonderful series of 10 photos shows Sydney as it was then, with the elegant villas of Glebe just visible in the distance. Already at this time, the encroachment of industry along the foreshores can be seen. Glebe and Forest Lodge were no longer a rural retreat. This is the first Pyrmont Bridge, which opened in 1858, a wooden pile bridge which charged pedestrians a penny to cross. The bridge was replaced by a steel structure in 1902, in time for the first of Sydney's cars. On the corner of Druitt and Clarence Streets are two very early two-room cottages. These buildings were the second wave of construction, replacing the temporary structures put up by the first settlers after landing in 1788. The synagogue in York Street was built in 1844 and demolished in 1879. Similar early Egyptian-style synagogues survive in Hobart and Launceston. And look at York Street, no trees. At the far end of York Street you see St Philip's Anglican Church, and closer to the camera are the Sydney markets, where goods were brought up the hill on Market Street from Darling Harbour. The Sydney markets were designed by Francis Greenway in 1820 and were demolished to make way for the construction of the Queen Victoria building in 1888. That's George Street in the foreground, next to the markets, and here we're looking towards Market Street and Circular Quay in the distance. St James in King Street was initially designed by Francis Greenway as a courthouse. It was consecrated as a church in 1824 and replaced St Philip's as the centre of official church activity. Back along Macquarie Street were the Hyde Park Barracks, opened in 1819, and in the early days they provided accommodation for convicts, female immigrants and aged and destitute women. Robinson's photos show Hyde Park with the early planting of the fig trees. It's Australia's oldest park, proclaimed by Governor Macquarie in 1810. In 1873, the construction of St Mary's Cathedral was underway, replacing the original cathedral that had burnt down 8 years earlier. This photo shows the nave and south facade under construction. This is Park Street, looking towards William Street, and in the distance, Woolloomooloo and Darlinghurst. That's the Australian Museum on College Street, built in 1849, and Australia's oldest museum. To the right is Sydney Grammar School, which began as Sydney College in 1835. Closer to the camera is St George's Presbyterian Church in Castlereagh Street, built in 1860. Only the front of the church onto Castlereagh Street can be seen today. In 1857, a vent for the underground sewer line was constructed facing Bathurst Street. Opened by the Mayor of Sydney, George Thornton, it was known as the Obelisk, or Thornton's scent bottle. Where College, Oxford and Liverpool streets intersect is now known as Whitlam Square, and when Robinson took this photo, it was one of Sydney's most prestigious addresses. Facing Liverpool Street, Lyons Terrace was completed in 1841 and featured a distinctive double-storey veranda which became a template for many other terraces. It overlooked Hyde Park and was home to a number of prominent citizens. This is the corner of George and Bathurst Streets in 1873, a lot less busy than it is today. Looking towards the present site of Central Station is the Devonshire Street Cemetery between Eddy Avenue and Elizabeth Street. It was consecrated in 1820 and closed in 1867 due to a lack of space. Behind the cemetery and standing in present-day Surrey Hills is Cleveland House, built in 1823 and attributed to architect Francis Greenway. It's considered to be Sydney's second oldest surviving house and is currently in a state of disrepair. This is the exhibition building in Prince Alfred Park. In 1868, the park was named for Queen Victoria's second son after he survived an assassination attempt at Clontarf picnic grounds. The first Agricultural Society show was held here in 1869. The building housed the War Memorial Museum from 1925 to 1936, when it moved to Canberra. This is the 8th of Robinson's panoramic photos, looking towards the south. The Good Samaritan Sisters established a school in Pitt Street in 1878, where Central Station now stands. The school moved to the Toxteth Estate in Glebe in 1901. The original pillars from the entrance to the Pitt Street site are now at the entrance to St Scholastica's College. Christ Church St Lawrence at Railway Square was designed by Edmund Blackett and completed in 1854. The church was extensively renovated following a fire in 1905. This is St Andrew's Cathedral before the installation of the spires on the west side. Consecrated in 1868, work on the spires began soon after Robinson took this photo. St Andrew's Cathedral was another work by Edmund Blackett. St Benedict's on Broadway was built in 1852 to a design by Augustus Pugin in the Gothic style. The parish expanded with a surge of migrants fleeing famine-ravaged Ireland. By 1883, St Benedict's School had the largest enrolment in the Archdiocese. This is Ultimo House, surrounded by its extensive garden, and by the time of this photo, it had been here for 70 years. It was built on 14 hectares of land granted to Surgeon John Harris by Governor King in 1803. Pleasure gardens were set out in an English style, with deer brought in from India to graze in the surrounding parklands. By 1818, Dr. Harris had increased his landholding to 94 hectares. St Barnabas on Broadway on the corner of Bay Street was built in 1858 and destroyed by fire in May 2006. It rose from the ashes in 2012. To the west and in the distance is Sydney University, designed by Edmund Blackett and completed in 1859. Blackett resigned his position as colonial architect to take on this commission. Blackett built Bajura on Glebe Point Road in 1853 so he could be closer to Sydney University to supervise his work. Bajura was just one of the elegant villas that were built from the 1830s. This image shows the southern end of Glebe with stylish dwellings taking advantage of waterfront views. Glebe was a highly desirable address for the next 50 years. One of Glebe's earliest and grandest villas was built on 36 hectares of land to the west of Glebe Point Road. In 1828, George Allen, a solicitor, commissioned John Verge to build an elegant country house for his growing family. Toxteth Park is now St Scholastica's College. At the time of Robinson's photos, St John's Church in Glebe Point Road looked like this. It was built in 1870 by Edmund Blackett and Horbury Hunt. The spire was completed by Cyril Blackett in 1911. Hereford House was built in 1829 and was located on the corner of Glebe Point Road and Piermont Bridge Road. The house was demolished in the 1930s and its land is now Foley Park. This sweeping pan from Blackwattle Bay and across Wentworth Park ends with Lyndhurst in the foreground. It was built in 1837 and still stands in Dargan Street. This is the earliest surviving glebe villa designed by John Verge and originally stood on nearly 15 hectares. The threatened demolition of Lyndhurst in the late 1960s was a key factor in the formation of the Glebe Society. Linwood was built in 1855 for George Wigram Allen and his wife Marion Boyce. The house was demolished in the 1940s for a trucking company, and the area is now townhouses at the end of Lombard Street. In 1835, Sydney merchant John Betts built Kew Cottage, a single-storey bungalow fronting Glebe Point Road. In 1893, the house was converted into an isolation unit for diphtheria patients. Glebe citizens signed a petition that a health hazard was posed by local children picking up flowers dropped from the coffins. Kew Cottage was torched by official order in 1907. A press photographer joined the crowd watching its demise. Absent was the matron, who couldn't bear to see the place burn down. Rothwell Lodge was built and occupied by the Reverend William Bennington Boyce and his family in 1847. Now restored and returned to residential living, Rothwell Lodge is an important survivor of the once gracious line of villas on the eastern side of Glebe Point. The building on the right is Bajura, Edmund Blackett's home, and on the left is Lynnodoc, built in 1842 on the corner of Glebe Point Road and Ferry Road, the present site of the Toxteth Hotel. Lynnodoc was demolished in 1887. In this image, Bajura is on the right, Lynnodoc is in the centre, and on the far left is Hawthorne, on the present site of Baker's Delight, where Edmund Barton, Australia's first Prime Minister, was rumoured to be born in 1849. You can see the chimneys of Hawthorne behind the shop front in this photo from 1991. By 1838, banker George Miller had built Forsyth Cottage, where he lived with his wife Sarah. He also built an adjacent residence, which he called Avon House. Renamed Avona, in 1878 it was put up for auction. Like other Glebe mansions, Avona became an institution. It was converted into an Anglican rescue home for girls. Strathmore was built in 1857 for Alexander MacArthur and set on 2 hectares sloping down to Blackwattle Bay. George Wigram Allen added a 3rd storey to Strathmore, as he did to Toxteth Park. Strathmore was rented out as a temporary women's college in 1892, with an initial intake of 4 undergraduates, seen here with the first principal, Louisa MacDonald. Strathmore finally succumbed to the demolisher's hammer in 1957. This 1880 picture of Blackwattle Bay is taken from the site of the present fish markets, looking back to the Glebe Escarpment. By this time, industrialisation had claimed much of the foreshore. This photograph shows the Cowrie Timber Company, and behind it, the houses on the escarpment. That's Kew Cottage, that's Linwood, and that's Rothwell Cottage, before an adjoining warehouse was built in 1892. Glebe had extensive water frontages in both Blackwattle and Johnson's Bay. The stylish villas that lined the foreshores were gradually demolished to be replaced by wharves and timber yards. This was the landscape that confronted new residents of Glebe in the 60s. And it was in this landscape that the Glebe Society was formed, determined to save what remained of the suburb's historic heritage.